their village. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hi everyone, it's Nicole and Lacey with More Than Child's Play. We're welcoming you here today for our third episode of our podcast. Just to remind you, we come to you from a business called Milestones and Miracles. We are moms, first of all, and I'm a physical therapist. Lacey is a speech therapist, and we made this podcast to bring you members from our village that help us every day on our therapy path and our parenting path to bring forward to our audience of therapists and parents. And today we're really excited to share an exciting guest with you.
Hi everyone, it's Lacey, and I am here to introduce Terin Morton Fetty.
Hello!
Woo, woo, woo. So Terin is an occupational therapist. She owns a private therapy practice, and she is a sensory expert, and we are beyond elated to be able to share with you Terin's knowledge of everything sensory processing. And hopefully you will take away something from this podcast that can help you, your child, or a child you know. So Terin, let's start at the very beginning. You know, we hear in the media, we hear families talk about their child has sensory issues, their child has been diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. And that just in itself sounds overwhelming. So let's back up. Can you just explain to us exactly what our sensory system is and how it works within our bodies?
I think the biggest issue now is it's becoming a trendy thing to say I have sensory issues. So it's getting exaggerated, just like ADHD got exaggerated, and if you keep too clean of a house, you have OCD and that sort of thing. So I tend to think of sensory processing disorders as being those people who cannot get through a typical day without a meltdown due to their response to sensory input.
Right.
But we all have, so sometimes I'll say to people, we all have sensory processing. We might not all have sensory processing disorder, but we wouldn't be functioning if we didn't have sensory processing, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we probably all have sensory issues. It's just spectrum, just like everything else. So,
right. It's if your sensory processing interferes with daily living, like you said earlier. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So what is for those people who are listening who aren't therapists, what is our sensory system? How does our sensory system work in everyday life, in a functioning person that it doesn't interfere with things?
Well, when we treat people with these issues, I always say that you can't address one sensory system at a time. You have to address all of them. Mm-hmm. And the way I start by describing it to parents is that, we're taught that we have 5 senses and we have 8. And the ones that...
I'm getting an education today, too. 8? All right.
So they forget vestibular.
They forget vestibular, they forget proprioceptive, and now there's this new one creeping in there called the interoceptive sense. So those 3 tend to be very heavily impacted in kids with these sensory issues. So with that vestibular sense, it's the first one to develop in utero. It's the most primitive, so all of the other sensory systems feed off of it. So you can't address the other systems. You can't address a visual issue without looking at the vestibular system, because the visual system gets so much of its information from the vestibular system.
And the vestibular system has to do with balance, correct?
Yes. So when most of us think of it, that's the first word that comes to mind, but its job is to respond to changes in head position and respond to changes in gravity. It also has a huge role in core strength and postural endurance, the ability to keep yourself upright, and it has a huge role in attention. So a lot of our kiddos that are diagnosed with ADHD actually have sensory processing disorder.
It goes hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
What about the other 2 big systems that you said are commonly left out? Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Proprioception is a huge one. It tells you tells you where your body is in space without looking at your body, and it's the sense that allows you to gauge force. So in those kids that can't be gentle, they can't pet an animal without slapping it upside the head, they can't softly close a door. They're slamming the car door every time.
Is
they
this the
shut it.
kid that when they sit on the floor, they have to be leaning against somebody to kind of be aware
Yes.
of where their body is in space?
They don't know where their body's edge is, so they're seeking out somebody else's edge. They're leaning against mom all the time, or they're leaning against the wall all
I like
the time.
that description. They don't know where their body's edge is. I need to remember
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
That's
and
good.
some of them have described themselves later on as almost feeling kind of floaty, like that ghost kind of
Right.
effect. So they crave crashing into things and slamming themselves down the floor to feel grounded and get more of that same kind of input.
I sometimes, and I'm not an occupational therapist, obviously I'm a physical therapist, so sometimes I joke like I'm kind of a little out of my lane. But when I'm describing giving proprioceptive input to a child who's having trouble with balance or a sense of their body when they're walking, sometimes I describe it to my parents as, imagine they're a jellyfish. And they're light and floaty, and they have all these tentacles, and they don't know where they are. And if
Right.
we put a little bit of weight on their ankles, it's like, oh, those are my legs. This is how I use them.
Yes, they need extra of that same kind of input.
They need extra. Okay, and what was that third one?
The third one is the interoceptive sense, and that's what allows you to sense what's going on internally. So those physiological type of processes. So when you're hungry, or when you're thirsty, or when you need to use the bathroom, a lot of parents come to me and say, "He never tells me he's hungry. You know, if I didn't feed him, I don't think he would ever seek out food on his own." And then there's the parents that say, "He never gets full."
Right.
So just the ability to read those internal rhythms, like knowing when you have a fever, you know, those.
That's important.
I never have thirst. I think I have a problem with this. I am never thirsty. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm never thirsty till it's too late, and then
until my hands are swollen. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm dehydrated. Yeah, interesting.
So can you tell our audience a little about what diagnoses are commonly associated with actual sensory processing disorder?
So sensory processing disorder, as it stands right now, is not an official diagnosis that stands alone in the DSM.
Okay.
So there's a huge push for more research so that it can stand alone.
And the DSM, explain just for people who aren't there.
That's the big giant Bible of diagnoses that psychiatrists and doctors use to diagnose.
And that are recognized by insurance companies
Yes,
too.
yeah, they're the ones that get the codes.
Okay.
So basically, I know that it stands alone because it's what I do all day.
Yes.
But a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists are very apprehensive to give the diagnosis because it's not in the book. So most often the diagnoses that I see are, of course, number one would be autism, because probably 98%, if not more, of kids with autism have sensory processing issues. The next one I see would be ADHD, learning disabilities, dyspraxia is a huge one. Those tend to go hand in hand.
Yeah. We know that not all children with sensory process disorder have a diagnosis.
Right.
What for a family or a child that doesn't have a diagnosis, how can the parent know that this is something they might be struggling with? What are some of the signs?
The biggest one I hear is we can't get through the day. You know,
Okay.
we can't get dressed and get to school. When we get off the school bus, we're melting down. Bedtime takes 3 hours. That's a biggie. Just these little daily routines, they can't transition through them.
And do you often see that? Do you not see these intense signs more consistently in children that are school age, that are going to school, or are there some big red flags that you see with infants? Or is it harder to tease out in a very young baby who cries normally as a way to communicate needs and wants?
I think it's definitely harder to tease it out in a baby, because they can't tell you what they're crying about, and they can't tell you what's going
Or
on.
a child with a language delay.
Well, and I often hear too, you know, he ate everything until he was 2, and now he'll eat 3 foods. You know, so it often looks different and then goes in reverse.
Yeah,
You know?
that's interesting because we just, our previous podcast was with a feeding therapist, a feeding specialist. And that was one of our questions we hear all the time. They'll eat everything and then all of a sudden they eat nothing. And the sensory component was one thing that she attributes to a combination of things that can cause those little food jags.
Yeah, and this sensory thing can be such a pendulum. Like a lot of times I'll start seeing a kid and he can't tolerate any movement. He's fearful to take his feet off the ground when he's on the swing. And then all of a sudden there'll be this switch where we go to the other extreme where we can't get enough movement and we're constantly seeking it and we're constantly moving. And so the idea behind treatment is you're rewiring the nervous system, but sometimes it goes too much the other way. But the ultimate goal is to find that happy medium. You know, we might swing back and forth a couple times, but
So you're trying to find kind of that proximal zone where the child is getting what they need to function.
Right.
With just enough input and not too much.
Yes. It's
But
a
it can change.
fine line.
I'm sure. I feel like parents or any people who don't live with a child with sensory processing disorder might not understand what it's like to go through that. And we talked about that a little bit. I know for us working in early intervention, I realized that we take things for granted that for other families might be a really big challenge. Simple things like haircuts, wearing clothing, things like
Brushing
that.
teeth.
Yeah.
That was a challenge in my house for many years.
Can you kind of illustrate for us, just from an empathetic standpoint for parents who are listening, who might not have a child themselves, but might have someone in their neighborhood or their child's school that's going through this? What might another family be going through that some of us might take for granted?
Well, I think often the response to sensory input can look like just bad behavior. It can just straight up look like bad behavior. So the thing I tell parents, and it's very hard to hear, is this is painful.
Yeah.
It hurts. It when the hand dryer goes off in the bathroom and they are screaming bloody murder and they have their hands over their ear, it feels like a helicopter is landing on their head and there's nowhere to go. They are not feeling their skin the way they should, and it's extremely uncomfortable. And that wrinkle in their sock that most of us feel for 30 seconds and our brain habituates to it and it's gone, they feel it all day long. So the second they come in the house, they're ripping off their shoes and their socks because
Just
they're
can't
still
stand
feeling it. Yeah.
Right. Little things like that.
And those things compound throughout the day. They're cumulative. So you know, it's why, you know, one day they might be able to get through the day and the next day there were just too many things and they kind of snap.
Which is hard, I think, because if someone's around a child regularly as a friend or a family member and they think, well, they were fine the last time we saw them. They handled that trip to the grocery store or grandma's house just fine. When the next time it might be a completely different situation. And what they might not be realizing is what that child experienced from a sensory perspective right before that visit or the day before might be impacting their reality.
And it happens to all of us.
Yeah.
Like if you have a migraine and you're tired and, you know, the way you respond to things is going to be completely different than how you would if everything was smooth sailing all day.
Right. In our house, my little guy with sensory processing disorder, sensory issues, I had convinced myself that he was, and he still is a little bit, just a very strong-willed kid. You know, he just wouldn't cooperate with toothbrushing. It had to be done. There was no choice about it. So we pushed and we pushed and we pushed, and finally we realized that toothbrush just felt like nails across his teeth or, you know, whatever. I mean, whatever the issue was, like, you know, but it took time that I felt like I needed to break his will. Really, I was torturing him, you know, which is heartbreaking as a parent when you realize that. But hopefully we're, you know, having this discussion today and bringing some light to this issue to help parents that are struggling and they can recognize it sooner. But I felt very judged as having a child that I couldn't control. You know, I felt that judgment, and I powered through it because I had a wonderful support system and we figured it out in time. But my heart goes out to those families. And I think, the bottom line is empathy. Don't judge a book by its cover. This is a life lesson.
You don't know what the child's going through, what the parent's going through.
And oftentimes, and our little guy was young when we started these issues, 3 years old. He was verbal, but he still couldn't describe to us exactly what the issue was until much later. So,
Well, and I think it's important to note, too, just from being your friend and going through that with you. And we're both therapists. So, I always joke we parent our kids together and our husbands let us. But we, as therapists and moms, would go through our therapy checklist of, okay, well, he's had this evaluation, or you've tried this, or the symptoms are this, maybe a behavior therapist, maybe a diet, maybe, and without saying too much, it ended up being a combination of multiple things that work. But my point is that it's not something that you can immediately figure out as a parent and make better tomorrow. As much as you want to make it better tomorrow, sometimes it takes trial and error to tease out exactly what is going on. And unfortunately, that takes patience.
And like Terin said, she brings a kid in, they're swinging to one side on the pendulum, and within a few visits, they're swinging the other direction. Yeah. So, within the child, even once you're getting the help, the child needs, it still can change. So, patience.
I'm going to jump forward just for a minute, just because we're on this topic. But we opened up the fact that we were doing this podcast with Terin to our listeners and our followers on social media to see what their questions were. And while we're talking about behavior, we have one follower that shared that her son had a language delay and obviously some sensory seeking stuff going on, some sensory issues. And her thing was, how do you are there tips for disciplining a child? Because as a parent, we know you need to meet their medical needs, their sensory needs, but at the same time, you want to shape that behavior into something that is positive in your home and in your community. So what do you tell parents? I'm sure it's a common question.
It is.
How do I handle discipline? How do I handle behavior?
This little guy, I think, was playing too rough with his siblings. That's one thing that they were struggling with. And she was trying to figure out, we know that it's a sensory behavior, but how do we deal with it in a way that is appropriate as far as discipline?
And, as long as I've been doing this, I still find that the biggest challenge for myself to navigate and, and of course for parents to navigate. So I always say that, once we start treatment and we figure out what sensory activities work for a particular child, and we put together what we call that sensory diet, so that list of individualized activities for that child, I say follow it religiously for 2 weeks, so that, we can see what happens when they get the sensory input at these specific intervals, and we take this really proactive approach. So they're getting the sensory input, so they shouldn't be seeking it as much.
And then the parent will be able to tease out what's a behavior versus what's a sensory seeking need for the child.
And the challenge is that a lot of times parents hear this information, they're like, oh my gosh, I've been doing it all wrong. When that's not really the case, it's just now we're a bit more aware. Right. So kids still need boundaries. They still need rules. And the thing I see a lot of is it goes the other way. It's, he needed proprioceptive input. I understand why he did that. Okay, well, it's still not okay to smash your sister to the ground.
Right.
There still needs to be
a firm line.
Right.
No, we don't do that. We can do this.
Well, and I think it's important to point out that in a nervous system that is functioning fairly efficiently, people seek those things out on their own. We seek out, while we're sitting here and I'm paying attention and making sure we stay on task, I'm putting the clip of a Sharpie pen and mutilating it with my fingers.
Is it your Sharpie?
It is my Sharpie.
Oh, okay.
I'm a fidgeter.
I was about to apologize to Terin for you.
The last podcast I ruined Lacey's Sharpie. But in order to focus, I have to fidget. And so, but I don't even notice I'm doing that until we start talking about it. So children and adults will seek out what they need regularly. For a kid, like you're saying, that has challenges with a nervous system that is not automatically doing that, giving them the opportunity and presenting behaviorally appropriate, developmentally typical experiences for them to seek out what they need, hopefully replaces that need to seek out things that are inappropriate.
Yeah,
correct?
or unsafe.
Or unsafe.
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
So a great example, I had a parent call the other day, and she said that his therapist and his psychiatrist say that during a session he gets in his chair upside down for the entire time they're talking to him, and she's like, that's why I'm calling you, because we don't get why. And he's seeking exactly what his nervous system needs. So getting upside down is a perfect combination of vestibular and proprioceptive input. You've got your head inverted, so that's really revving the nervous system. It's stimulating, it's organizing, but then you've combined it with that really calming, grounding input of the compression to the spine, that proprioceptive input. So you're getting a double dose of sensory input.
I have a kid that's upside down all the time. And in fact, when we were putting out a few teasers about this podcast and we're giving examples of our own children with sensory seeking behavior, I quickly, 5 minutes, found like 8 pictures of her upside down in different settings. In a tree, in a wheelbarrow race, in the middle of the kitchen, because she will come home from school, and as I say, how was school today, she'll immediately start doing handstands while she's talking to me in the middle of the kitchen.
Right.
And sometimes it's in the grocery store. And I'm like, gross, the floor is disgusting, stop it. But she always seeks out that upside down position. And I think she needs it. And I'm curious, she was a C-section baby. Do you see babies that were born in C-sections have different...
There's not a lot of research to back it up, but it makes complete sense to me.
I feel like she didn't get squeezed properly.
Yes, like that compression down the birth canal is there for a reason. And getting in that...
Yeah,
and I always wonder about kids that are breech, too, because they don't get in that inverted position. So... It would make sense that they would crave it later
she craves a lot of cuddling, too.
So, the bottom line, I think, is oftentimes someone who's not aware of sensory challenges and what it could look like in a child, they see the kid standing on their head in the chair in the classroom or in the doctor's office, and they're like, they're misbehaving. They're not paying attention. They're being ornery. But actually, that child is seeking out that upside down position so they can pay attention and participate.
Right.
Yes.
So we have to look at it with different eyes.
Which kind of brings us to a conversation, which is, I'll just disclaim this. It's a bit of a soapbox for Lacey and I, and something that we're passionate about. But we wanted to touch on sensory processing disorder, sensory needs, and school. We hear all the time. We have friends that are teachers. We obviously have children in school. We've done many lectures and teacher trainings that touch on this a little bit for teachers at all levels, K through 12. And, with increased pressure for testing and high academic standards, we know all children, but especially little children, are sitting for longer periods of time. And if you're a parent or anyone really, and you've been on social media, you've seen adaptations, pictures and examples of a classroom chair or, fidgets on the desk, things that people have shared for ideas. I'm just curious how you feel about this, because from one side, it's like, well, they don't get to move a lot. The reality, it is what it is. So this is a way to get them input through the day. But then I've seen other therapy pages and blogs when I've heard comments like, this is ridiculous. They just need to let them go outside. So I'm just curious, as a sensory certified OT, how you feel about this. What do we know about what our kids need to feed their nervous systems through the day to be successful academically? What do you suggest?
Well, if I was in charge,
yes, let's pretend you're in charge.
we would triple the recess.
Yeah,
I feel
I feel like 100 years ago, there
was a lot more.
There was so much more play. Play is their job.
Yes,
right.
Yep.
That is their job, and they're not getting any of it. So, we're just looking to find these little modifications where we can plug in everywhere to kind of compensate for it.
But nothing really replaces it.
Nothing replaces pure recess. And, I'm thinking about the little girl you're mentioning that was, getting upside down, it used to be that you'd climb a tree and, you'd be hanging from your legs and you'd have to problem solve how to get down. And you don't see any kids climbing trees.
You're not allowed
anymore.
to climb trees.
You'll get hurt.
Yes.
I mean, I worked on a playground project where we were going to bring in some big boulders just for the kids to climb on or even just sit and read. And we weren't allowed to bring a rock on a playground.
Right. Yeah. And it's a big liability issue here.
Yeah.
But you go to other countries, you go to Brazil, you go to France, and, they've got these big bungee systems on their playgrounds and,
Yeah. My niece and nephew live in Taiwan, and they're visiting right now. And I was asking my niece about her school day and recess. She has a morning recess period, and then she has a midday recess, and she has an afternoon recess. And when I added up the minutes, it was over an hour through the day that she's moving, but in 3 separate sessions as an older elementary student, which I think is incredible. I mean, it's really incredible. And, one of the topics that we touch on when we do our lecture about the brain and how the brain works well in the classroom, we talk about vestibular system. Because, if you look at that triangle of where things are built, all those academic things, right, come from the vestibular system. So one thing I kind of just makes me so sad is not just the amount of recess, but what's happening at recess.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to have vestibular types of playground equipment on most playgrounds anymore. Things like
A merry-go-round.
Right.
a teeter-totter.
Well, and things that would build endurance too. So if you're getting these bursts of 20 minutes here and 10 minutes here, you're not running for
You're not exhausted.
an extended
You're not-
period, and that core strength can't build up. And, almost every child that walks through the doors in my clinic has really weak core strength.
And that just is a testament to the type of play they're engaging in, which is very little physical play, right? I mean,
and lack of tummy time.
Yes. Yes. And
Soapbox on top of soapbox. Lack of tummy time as infants because they're in a lot of containers, seats, swings, bouncers.
so we're not engaging that. And then I find what happens is, if you have these sensory issues on top of it, it's kind of like when you're driving a car and you get tired. If you start to slump and check out, then you're going to fall asleep at the wheel.
Yeah.
And the same thing, if you start to slump and check out in the classroom, you're not hearing anything the teacher's saying. But if you sit up straight and you start shaking your head, moving your body around, you're getting more alert. You're turning on your brain, you're turning on your vestibular system. And so, that's what a lot of those kids that are moving constantly in class, they're just trying to stay engaged where it looks like they're doing anything about that.
My mom was a teacher for 45 years, and she would always complain to me that her middle school students would pick the Formica off their desk. And I said to her, give them some Play-Doh and they'll stop.
Right.
Like they're just trying to find something to feed their nervous system so that they can pay attention to you. They're trying to pay attention to you. Hand them some clay.
Right.
You
got to replace it with something.
With something purposeful. So I guess if we magically were lucky enough to have administrators or policymakers listening to us and they wanted to do the right thing, recess would be one longer period, multiple longish periods.
Yes, that's what I would say.
Multiple longish periods throughout the day.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think more learning should be going on the playground too. More learning that involves moving. I always laugh because when I go to occupational therapy type conferences and courses, it's the only kind of course that you go to where all OTs know what kind of sensory system they have. So they know if they have a real low arousal kind of thing or if they're somebody that revs really high. So they'll place themselves in the room according to
their needs.
They're
very in tune.
Yes, and they'll bring their own therapy ball to the, to sit on, or they know they got to stand in the back to stay alert.
It's interesting.
So I always think about that when I think about these poor teachers that are trying to accommodate so many needs.
Within one classroom. And then you
Yes.
add on top of that medications, diagnoses, emotional issues. It's crazy. But everything that we've read, and a lot of studies that we've read, lead to the conclusion of allowing a variety of sensory experiences within your classroom and the option for kids to make choices based on their needs.
And limit the technology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amen.
No,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
how does that play a role?
It's just so sedentary.
Yes. Right.
And in so many of the kids I see that are, dancing either near the autism spectrum or on it, they become obsessed with it. It's all they want to do. It's the only thing that's gratifying, and so it makes it so much. And
It's a cycle, then.
That's what those video games are designed to do. They're designed to plug into that pleasure center of your brain.
Yeah.
Pleasure center, sorry, and
Create
they
that
can't get
addiction.
pleasure anywhere else. So when I'm trying to engage them in an obstacle course in a ball pit, it's not engaging. And that should be so fun.
And not to mention that some basic, I remember I went to, at the elementary school, for Teacher Appreciation Week, parents stepped in during recess so teachers could go to lunch. And at field day at the school, we would try to lead games where we'd say, okay, this game is kind of like Duck, Duck, Goose, or we're going to do this as a relay race, but here's the rules. And they literally, 8 out of 10 of them did not know what Duck, Duck, Goose was, did not know what a relay race was. They did not know how to play simple, physical, social games. Literally didn't know how. And so a lot of times when we were working the recess period, they would kept coming to us for, I have a headache, I need a drink. They kept trying to go back into the building because they didn't know what to do outside.
And that's sad. I mean,
It's
that's
so heartbreaking.
to see that.
My mom tells me that back in the 1950s, there were playground coordinators, like the 50s and 60s. She worked in high school as like a playground supervisor in the summer. So her job was to be at the public playground and like facilitate group games outside.
We need that again.
Yes.
We need that
Yes.
position reinstated within our community.
To literally teach them how to play simple games.
And just to go back to what Terin was saying about when kids are engaged in technology so often and that becomes their pleasure in life, like the only thing they really get joy from, that also interferes with communication. I see a lot of little guys, and I'll say to the parents, see how happy he is when he's playing that app on your phone or that game on his iPad. I said, I want him to experience that joy when he interacts with us. We have to limit that screen and pull them away from it so that they can start socially interacting to eventually communicate with us. But again, that's a whole different podcast about technology. But I think when there's too much time on the screen, that addiction pleasure center is fed in their brain. It's impacting their ability to communicate and be social within their world. And it's obviously impacting their physical activity within their day, which then negatively impacts their sensory system sometimes. So
Well, and I'm getting more and more calls for adolescents with sensory issues. I feel like there's a giant hole where somehow, there were sensory issues when they were children. They weren't really addressed. And then, with that lack of connection comes the anxiety. And with that
Social
heightened
implications.
response to sensory input comes anxiety. And so that starts to look like the depression and these anxiety disorders later on.
right.
But there's not really many people addressing that sensory piece.
right.
in
It's
there,
a
so.
missing piece of the whole picture that we need to remember to include when we're looking at what's going on.
Yeah, from very young to up through adolescence.
Right.
It sounds so.
So let's go back to another question from a listener. Another listener has a child that is extreme on both sides of the sensory spectrum, craves and seeks out vestibular input, is spinning a lot, likes to be upside down, swinging, but then is also avoiding loud noises, crowds of people, haircuts, transitions within his environment. This parent asked us, is there an in-between we're missing? Is there a way to make all the things a little bit less Is it really all or nothing? Because quite honestly, it's exhausting, which I think is
Of course
common.
it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, I love this question because I love the phrase, the in-between. The in-between is definitely missing here. And, you know, it's so rare that I see a kid that is totally an avoider or totally a seeker. It's usually all over the map. And the whole point behind what we do during treatment is to rewire these systems so that they all meet at that in-between, so that you find the happy medium. That's what a regulated kid looks like. Sensory processing disorder means that you're hopping between extremes. Okay. So that I think that's just...
That sounds like a child who could benefit from an evaluation.
Well, absolutely. And underneath that sensory processing umbrella, you have what they call all these little clusters of diagnoses, but they tend to fall in the category of a modulation disorder or a discrimination disorder. And it sounds like this kid almost definitely has what we call modulation issue, where it's a how much question. How much sensory input can you tolerate? How much movement can you tolerate before you get overstimulated? How much sound can you tolerate? Whereas that discrimination disorder looks more like a how question, or a, where's that sound coming from? Or where did I just touch you? Or what letter did I just form on your back? It's more of those kinds of questions. So I see a lot of kids that fall in this modulation category where, they're fine, but as soon as they start moving and jumping around the clinic and getting on the swings, we soar to one end of hyperactivity, and then we can't get it back to that happy medium. So what we usually do is combine that with what we call the universal modulator, and that's that proprioceptive
the deep
input.
pressure.
So we're doing resistance, we're doing heavy weight, we're doing weight bearing, that kind of thing.
It's like the regulator.
Yes.
Mouth up.
Another listener has a little one that she says is about to be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And we know that children with autism spectrum disorder often do have sensory processing disorder. This child in particular is taking her pants off consistently, constantly, all day long. This parent was curious to know if there were any tips or tricks that you could pass along to help her keep her child's pants on, which I don't think is an uncommon question. I don't have the answer to it, but I hear it a lot from parents.
Yeah. I get a lot of calls. I got a call last week that the mother didn't know if she would be able to make the appointment because she didn't know if it would be a day that her child decided that she would wear clothing. Again, it can depend on what day and how they're feeling that day. But I've had other kids tell me later on that, it just took trying on a million pairs of pants to figure out what worked. A lot of kids are really sensitive around the waistline, and that can be a sign of a primitive reflex that hasn't integrated. There's a lot of kids that just need that sensory diet in place. So some of the things we'll use for that, we use what we call the Wilbarger brushing protocol, which is just using a simple surgical brush to brush the skin, and you combine that with joint compressions. A lot of times I recommend that parents warm the pants up in the dryer so they're not cold. I recommend letting them choose whatever they're going to wear, so giving them like 10 different options. And that way, a lot of times with sensory issues, there has to be choice involved, because these kids learn to control their environment so that they don't have to be exposed to any type of uncomfortable sensory input. So they become very territorial about routine. And if anything happens outside the routine, that can trigger a meltdown. I know, like Lacey, you were kind of saying that control was an issue in your house. So one of the things I always recommend is give them the control where you can. Wherever you can give a choice, give a choice. But, there still needs to be a rule that we have to get dressed.
You have to wear pants.
Yeah.
But
or we have to wear a dress. Or we have to wear
something.
We have to put clothes on.
But you said, they're trying to control their environment so that they can tolerate and get through their day, correct?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
if they're sticking to one pair of pants, it's because that's the one pair of pants that they can stand to put on and keep on to function through their day. So there is a reason behind it. It's not just the stubborn, strong-willed kid, And I mean, the sooner, the parent can realize that, then the easier it is on everyone.
I've seen a lot of things about tagless, seamless clothing, socks, underwear. Is that just a marketing thing? Is that really worth it?
It's absolutely worth it.
Are there certain ones you recommend or that you like?
It's so different for every kid. Sometimes just turning the socks inside out works for some kids because they can't feel the seam anymore.
A good idea.
But I just tell parents, take them with you, try on as many things as you can, and hopefully they can tell you that something works.
Right.
And
I knew one little guy that did not want to wear a coat. What would that? And it was like middle of winter, snow falling on the ground, and the mom's like, I look like a terrible parent. Again, I feel the judgment because my kid's not wearing a coat in the snow. But what could that be about? How could that be resolved?
Again, that's just a sensory thing. They don't feel. A lot of kids don't feel cold the same way. A lot of these kids overheat easily. I had one kid years ago that would try to put on 8 pairs of pants. Again, just a huge
the pressure
signal, that he's not feeling his body, really not feeling his body.
Right.
So with the coat, it's kind of the opposite. I don't want all this stuff on me.
It feels like too much.
Yeah.
Maybe too constricting or,
And I usually say if it's not that cold outside, don't worry about it.
Yeah. Some things
aren't worth the battle.
Yeah. Pick your battles. Right.
You touched for a minute on that a reflex might not be integrated in a child that doesn't like things around their belly. And I think this is a really interesting area of therapy. It's definitely one that I would like to learn more about. Can you just explain to the listeners about infantile reflexes and more mature reflexes and kind of that process, what happens there, and if it doesn't happen, how we might know that reflexes are at play?
Well, there are a lot of primitive reflexes, but the idea behind them is that infants have them for certain developmental reasons, and by the age of 6 months, most of them should integrate. You shouldn't see them anymore. And if they don't, then it can start to affect development. So a perfect example is, for one of the reflexes, if you turn a child's head and their whole body turns with it, that's a sign that a specific reflex hasn't integrated. So the way that can impact them later, you can imagine that if you need to turn your whole body every time you look at something, it's not really a real efficient way to move around or follow a teacher back and forth across the classroom. One of the big ones I look for in my clinic is I'll have kids belly crawl. And by belly crawl, I mean with their belly on the floor and getting that reciprocal movement of both sides of the body. And I'll see them not engage their legs at all. I'll see them only engage the right side. And again, and that's just another developmental cue that
I think that's more. I think that, although I'm not seeing specific research to this fact, I think that that's happening more than we realize, or more than is documented.
Oh, definitely. Well, and when you do that belly crawl, you're supposed to get a very good toe dig to kind of launch yourself forward. And I always look for that because a lot of these kids are tripping all the time, and they never really developed that. So they're not picking their feet up off the ground, or, so.
I see it when I walk through a school and I'm peeking in at gym class. And some of the positions in all fours, with some of the exercises, you can tell that some of those nervous systems just never fully made that transition to a bigger kid's nervous system.
And it can impact a lot of things if you're not engaging both sides of your body in a reciprocal fashion. Then both sides of the brain aren't communicating effectively, and you need both sides of the brain to read. You need both sides of the brain to ride a bike. You know, it starts to impact all these other things.
It's a two-way street. We always think about brain to body, but we forget that it's body to brain as well. So if the body isn't doing what it should be doing, then the brain doesn't get the proper messages. So if this might be an issue, generally, I know this is a very specific topic, but parents should look for lack of coordination, trouble with bilateral use of the body.
Yes.
What other kind of things are red flags that a reflex assessment might be warranted?
So,
Falling.
falling a lot. And I'll look at things just like simple jumping jacks, you know. But I ask a lot of questions on my assessment about that coordination piece, like swimming. Are we still riding a bike with training wheels and we're 8 years old? Using scissors, can we
Those are great questions.
You know, can we hold the page with one hand and steer with the other, you know?
Yeah. And if those reflexes haven't integrated, it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's ways to
help them integrate, and you know, part of it's that sensory integration approach
to tune up the nervous system in a way.
Yes.
That's good. I just had another question about, since this last question was about autism, and we know the numbers are rising. I'm just curious, as an OT, you know, you hear people say there's it's happening more and more, and then you hear other people say it's just being diagnosed more, and then you hear other people say it's being misdiagnosed. Everybody's been throwing into this autism umbrella if they don't know what's going on. What are your thoughts for parents that their kids maybe have behaviors that are on the spectrum, to make sure that they get to the right place for the right diagnosis and the right help?
First of all, I this is probably my biggest soapbox, because
Preach on, sister.
Preach, sister.
This is absolutely not just being diagnosed more. It is a full-fledged epidemic. And if something's not figured out about it, it's going to impact, you know, it's going to be 1 in 10 kids in no time. And so this is, in my humble opinion, not so humble opinion, it's not being diagnosed more. And, you know, people were still saying that 20 years ago when I just got into this field. And now we've gone from 1 in 500 kids to 1 in, you know, what are we at, 36 now, I think. So
36.
and that data is probably 4 years old. So I think you really need to do all the research you can.
Good places to look. Where should they go? If there's a parent out there listening that is just trying to figure it out, and all they have so far is a pediatrician.
Genetically, I think they should be testing every woman that's pregnant for that MTHFR gene, because we know that doesn't that gene means you don't get rid of toxins as easily. We don't know what's causing this yet. We don't know if it's environmental. It's most likely environmental.
But they're getting closer.
They're getting closer.
And the identification of that gene was very important, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm. But, you know, not everybody that's on the spectrum has that gene. So I'm really big on nutrition and knowing what you're putting in your body. And there's a book that I recommend to a lot of parents called What's Eating Your Child. It's by Kelly Dorfman. And she breaks it down by a case study. And she just kind of talks. She's one of the first people that linked the sensory issues with the nutritional aspect. And she talks about different kinds of scenarios, like if your child's engaging in this behavior, you're seeing these kind of things, try this. And it's just a great place to start. So
we hear that all the time. One of our favorite dietitians has said to us, anytime a parent questions me about food, I say, you don't believe me that what your kid's eating affects their brain? Come have a beer with me.
Yeah.
It absolutely does. Yeah.
Which is so true. If you know, alcohol ingested can affect your brain, so can dyes, preservatives, toxins.
And, I had a doctor tell me years ago she had a lady come in who was on the autism spectrum, who she'd been treating for years, who had a extreme gluten sensitivity. She went to a cocktail party and she asked if the drink had gluten in it, and they said no. And so she had one, and she took like 3 sips, and she said a panda walked in and sat down across from her. So her response to it was so strong that it made her hallucinate.
Wow.
That's crazy.
So, I just think about some of these kids with severe autism and how their diet could be influencing them, and they can't tell us.
Right. And I think, too, a lot of kids that are identified as on the spectrum or suspected to be on the spectrum, they have some difficulty with their diet because they get so stuck in a routine of eating the same thing over and over and over, which then is just feeding that possible monster that, is putting maybe too much of a toxin into them, which is then just exacerbating their symptoms or their behaviors or whatever it is, sensory issues, whatever it is. So it's a tough issue, but it's a valid, legit concern that certainly families need to look at.
And obviously the earlier the better.
Absolutely.
In terms of, I know that I've seen before the MChat online as a general quiz that if parents take it, can give them some information whether they should seek out special help or not. As an OT, I honestly don't know very much about the MChat except for that it exists and it's free and it's online. Is it something that you recommend as an OT? Is it helpful? Is it not specific enough?
It's not something I recommend a lot, but I do have parents that do that and find it helpful. So I'll say, like, if you're really questioning, there's things you can do online and kind of get a better picture or a number. Some people want a number to to put to things. So, and the thing about my practice is you don't have to have a diagnosis. So my thing is always, if you think that something's going on,
Come see you.
Yeah, it's just worth it to check it out.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid of seeking out help to get
You don't
answers
need
to your
a validation
questions.
of a diagnosis to get treatment.
No.
Then let's talk about your practice a little bit. So you're certified in sensory training.
Yeah, that's a hard spot because there's not an official certification in sensory integration. The closest you can get, the closest you used to be able to get is to get certified in the sensory integration and praxis test. And that course and that test were designed by kind of the godmother of sensory integration and the people who trained under her.
Okay.
So that course in itself can no longer be taken in recent years. It's of dissipated. The people that carried the assessment and offered the course and the people that taught the course at USC
I didn't know that.
fell different ways. So now USC is designing their own thing.
Okay.
But what I say to people is you want to find an OT that they don't need to have that necessarily, but that does show that they've taken a lot of continuing ed in this specific little corner.
Because it's a detailed little corner. I mean, it really is detailed.
And complex.
It is. So if someone, we'll give our listeners, if they're local, the information for you. But if they're not local and they're looking for someone with this level of training, is there a database anywhere? Is there a website that can point parents in a direction to find an OT with this specialization?
The Star Institute in Denver, I think, is always a good place to start because that's kind of the premier sensory facility in the country. Okay. So I would start there, and that's how a lot of people find me. I have people call from even out of state just looking for resources. And we don't really require a doctor's referral or of course the diagnosis. So you can just come and get an assessment and get some answers.
Yes, wonderful.
And you can do it over the phone. We can do, we'll do whatever we can
Because there's so many families that need this service.
Mm-hmm.
There's really, really so many, and probably so many that don't even realize they need the service.
Well, and I found that a lot of the people that walk through our door, those kids are kids that aren't going to qualify for services under an IEP in the school system. They're not suffering necessarily that much academically, but they're suffering. It's a struggle every single day, but it's not enough of a struggle to get some services, and there can be so much red tape involved to get services in certain aspects. So,
and you have that unique perspective because you've worked in the school system. You worked in a private school, and that's kind of what led you to open your own practice, correct?
right.
Yes. So Terin, you can speak to both sides of the table there, which is really important to
Is
serve
that what
the families.
motivated you to start your own practice? Or why did you decide to do it?
I just had a fascination with the sensory perspective, and I worked in the schools, and I was lucky enough that the person I worked for in the schools really wanted to start a sensory practice. So he and I opened one together, and that's what I did for many years. And then I kind of went off on my own and opened this one. And it's just...
Do you have a website you can share, or a social media site that if our listeners are looking for you? She is located in Winchester, Virginia, in case you're listening for close to where we are. How can they get a hold of you if they're interested?
Our website is skyclimbcenter.com. The name of our practice is Skyclimb Sensory Development Center. You can find us on Facebook.
Yeah, we'll link that when we post the podcast so that you can easily find it. And so they don't need a doctor's referral. They just need to call you.
Not in the state of Virginia.
Excellent. So one thing that we do is we try to educate the public as therapists who have worked in the special ed community for a long time. It's important for us to let people know what happens in the houses that we see, so that our communities can be more responsive, more empathetic, more supportive of families dealing with any challenge. But in terms of sensory processing disorder, how can we do a better job? Are there resources that you suggest? Are there things that parents can do to support friends and neighbors?
I always say that the best way to support your friends is your time. Because
That's
so
true with
many
anything, right?
so many of the parents I see just need a break. They just need a few hours of
Alone time.
Yes. And most of them find it really hard to find a babysitter or somebody that understands their child that can cope with the behaviors the way they do, so they never get a break. And I'm seeing a trend where a lot of these bigger companies are doing the sensory friendly things now, the sensory friendly viewings of movies, that Chuck E. Cheese is doing it now. So I think it's going in the right direction, where they're offering smaller groups, less sound, less noise, less
softer lighting.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
I got you, girl.
We all could use some softer lighting, that's for sure. And I think it's important too to educate our kids so that they're aware of their peers.
Yes.
And the challenges that their peers might be facing, and ways that they can be good friends to their classmates and their friends.
Absolutely.
When my son was, before we got diagnosed, when he was going through his crazy sensory seeking behaviors, he was one that had vestibular and proprioceptive sensory issues. But my daughter at the time was maybe 9 years old, and she described him. She drew this picture of him one day, totally unprompted from me. But she drew a picture of him and wrote on the paper, "I love my brother, but his movement is crazy."
Did you save that?
I saved it for sure. But in her little innocent mind, every time that she tried to play with him, he was bumping into her. He was hugging her too tight. He was on his head upside down. He was running away from her because he was all hyped up and overstimulated. So talking to our kids about it, and I think that was a very eye-opening moment for me as both of their, as their mother, to talk to her about it, and how we can help him, and this is why we're doing this, to help him. But, kids, we underestimate a child's ability to really understand and empathize. And if we just have conversations with kids about so-and-so in your classroom or so-and-so in your play group does this because it's what his body tells him he needs. So this is how you can play and interact with him to help him or, to include him. And I just think that's really important, is to have a conversation with your kids.
Yeah. Well, and even giving them a language for their own self, even
Absolutely.
to relate. Even if they're not so far that it's interfering with their day. But I'll often say to my daughter will come home from school and notoriously sit on the kitchen chair and rock back on the back two legs, back and forth while she's doing her homework. And I'm like, go get a ball. You need to sit on a ball. This is what happens when your parents are both therapists. But, and I'll say to her, you've been sitting too long all day. Your body's seeking out movement, but you're going to flip that chair.
Right.
And you're going to ruin my floors too.
I'm going to be angry.
And and your head. So, but to give them a sense for, that's what my body's doing. So that kid in my class whose body doesn't automatically seek that out might need something else or might behave in a certain way, not because they're trying to misbehave, but because their body can't seek that out.
Well, and when I worked in the schools, I found it so helpful. If I had a kid that needed like a tea stool to sit on or a wiggle cushion, I found it so helpful to just take a bunch in so all the kids could feel what it felt like and explain why that was needed. And that's the big phrase I use a lot. It's not about what's fair here. It's about what's needed. Yes. If Jimmy's in a wheelchair, everybody doesn't get a wheelchair because everybody doesn't need a wheelchair.
Or if someone needs glasses, not everyone needs glasses.
Yeah, right.
But
that's a good way to explain it.
That's a great tip for teachers.
And kids understand fair. And,
absolutely they do. Yeah.
So, I find that's kind of resonates sometimes.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you wish you have a microphone now right in front of you?
Oh, man.
Is there anything that you feel like parents should know, therapists should know, community should know? I mean, we've talked about a lot of things, so it might not be, but if you had an open mic, because you do, besides rapping, which you might want to do, what else do you want to say?
Oh, you don't want that. I just always say, if I can get a kid before the age of 3, definitely before age of 5.
Well, that's
good we can make big things happen, a lot of the time.
Right.
That's really
If your kid walks in my office at 16, we can make things happen, but it's going to be a much longer road and process. Yeah.
Right.
And we have to address it in a completely different way.
Right.
So, the earlier I can see kids, the biggest difference we can make.
And important for pediatricians too.
Yeah. And the other big thing is sensory integration. Sensory processing issues aren't an excuse to act like a jerk. So
put that on a t-shirt, friends. You heard it here.
So, I have a lot of parents that get so sympathetic to their child and empathetic to their child's issues that they stop disciplining them.
Setting boundaries.
That's a recipe for disaster. Like, you still have to enforce the rules. There still has to be a line. There has to be boundaries, and sometimes I feel bad educating parents on all these issues and waking them up to it, and then seeing that now it's an excuse for every not so great behavior. So, and that's a hard line. But,
sure.
Because disciplining is so individual and parenting choices are so personal.
Right.
So you can give them the information, but really at the end of the day, it's theirs to do what they want with.
Yeah. And, the thing I think makes me a little bit different as a therapist is I'm not afraid to push. And
I like that.
I feel like some kids need pushed over the hump a lot of the time.
Right, because they might not be getting that at home. If
Right.
it's a parent that's excusing every misbehavior and, more kind of overly sensitive.
And it's easier to push sometimes if you're not the parent.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's especially for mothers. It's, they get the brunt of that's who the child is usually most comfortable with. They get the brunt of all the behavior. So it's a lot of times easier for me to push than it would be for them.
Yeah. And that's why you're here and why we're glad you're here.
That's why you're an awesome therapist, Terin.
Thank you. Thank you. You can keep.
Well, thank you,
saying that.
Terin, for talking with us and for teaching us and for teaching our listeners and just for being a really important voice for our community. We learned so much talking
Thank you for having me.
It was great.
This was fun.
So we will link, with this podcast, we will link any resource website that Terin mentioned so that you can have all the resources shared here. And be sure to comment if you liked it, review it. Remember that we are available at milestonesandmiracles.com. We have a plethora of resources for you. We have our product, 123 Just Play With Me, that makes an excellent gift for new parents and also a resource for therapists to use in a variety of ways. We have some examples outlined on our resource or on our website. We have our MedBridge education courses listed on our website, and we offer a discount always for our listeners. So if you're a therapist looking for continuing education, stop by and check us out. We also have a ton of free resources on our blog and other things, downloads on our page. So be sure to check us out, follow us on social media, and stay tuned because we have a lot more people in our village that we're excited to share with you and are really enjoying sharing this podcast with you. Bye.